the Garuda is a symbol of both raw power and speed. It's often lauded as the lord of the sky. The Garuda's wings are said to span many miles, and when it flaps its wings, Asia faces the specter of destructive winds and floods. While it may bring devastation, the Garuda is also an emblem of hope. Its strength is a measure of the strength Asia needs to pick up the pieces from the recent spate of disasters and to live again. There's been a lot of heartache in Asia in the past 2 weeks. Its resolve has been put to the test once again. Typhoons that ravaged the Philippines, Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. Without respite, an earthquake shook the western coast of Sumatra 4 days later, bringing scores of buildings crashing to the ground.
Nagay matola manangit, siya malam manangit, ibuat ti mga gapa. Manilip-lite mautwa madua pa. Sampai malam kita tenta ay matugal wala doon. Masipitindi ko rin ka na niyan to pa ya diwa pa. Pulang mo ka na sogang pulang ka na tinggal na duwo tinggal kan tao ni pulang ulay.
Every day the death toll climbs higher. Within a span of 2 weeks, disaster struck Asia relentlessly. Typhoon Ketsana hit the Philippines on the 26th of September. It brought about the worst flooding since 1967. 3 days later, it slammed into Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. To date, the typhoon has killed 400 and displaced 500,000 people across Southeast Asia. With the growing death toll comes questions about whether the scale of human disaster could have been averted. How prepared was Asia for nature's blasts? Is corruption and poor urban planning to blame? In flood-prone Manila, the death toll came largely from overcrowded shanty towns built along rivers with poor drainage systems.
We've created a non-stable situation where, because our populations have expanded so incredibly over the last, say, 70 years, 70 years ago the world's population was 2 billion. And now it's 6.5, 6.7 or so. So we've now expanded into areas that are dangerous, coastal areas for tsunamis, coastal areas for typhoons.
Sheila is a permanent resident in Singapore. Her family of 9 was in the province of Rizal in the Philippines when the typhoon struck. They received no warning and barely managed to escape. By then, the water was chest high.
They were not really aware, they were not updated of the things happening all around them. My niece saw the water coming from the window, and that's when she shouted, "Papa, Papa, the floodwater is already here." And so they had to bring the children to our neighbor.
Much more could be done in the Philippines to do urban planning a bit better. You have to take the long view. You have to say that to yourself and to your communities that, look, we have this basic issue of typhoons, and we need to make maps that show where landslides are likely to happen, and we need to have laws that tell us, what we can do in terms of building density or where we can build.
The same sad refrain can be heard in Padang. Padang in western Sumatra lies along one of the most volatile seismic fault lines, making it vulnerable to earthquakes and tsunamis. Yet it houses nearly 1 million people, often in poorly constructed buildings. That was also suspected to be the cause of the high death toll during the Sichuan earthquake in China.
In the case of Sumatra, the buildings collapsed because the buildings were not constructed according to regulation, and the authorities didn't properly enforce it. Philippines, again, city planners had devised certain waterways and certain other regulations which were not enforced properly by the authorities. So that's definitely human mistakes.
With a few exceptions, Asian governments have by and large done little in the way of disaster preparedness and mitigation. Reasons cited: resource constraints, insufficient attention paid to scientific evidence, and not enough money put into preparedness.
I think it's a long-term aspect, and poverty is one of the factors that contributes to complex causes of the calamity of the disaster itself, as in poverty will lead to people tend to migrate to urban areas because they want to make a better living. And because of that, the urbanization starts growing and there is dense population and then shady infrastructure. That is that is one thing that the government has to really think of for the future, and they will need to include international agencies and local NGOs and also communities.
The staggering costs needed for relief and rehabilitation underlines the importance of putting disaster prevention measures in place. $1 spent on preparing for disasters could save $10 in rebuilding efforts later on. In the wake of the disasters, Asia is now staring at economic damages of up to $200 million. This is the day the tsunami struck Asia. After the devastating 2004 tsunami, monitoring systems have been improved greatly. More instruments to record the wave motion and water levels of escalating tsunamis have also been installed in the Indian and Pacific Oceans. Vulnerable nations like Indonesia and India have tsunami warning centers. They also have predictive systems for earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, but they aren't always useful. Predictive science for a typhoon, on the other hand, is fairly reliable. The storms that lashed the Philippines and Indochina were apparently tracked to within a fairly small margin of error. What let the people down was the failure of organization in emergency services. But natural calamities don't wait for governments to get their act together. Even as aid workers struggle to help Katsana's victims, the tropical storm Palma hit just a week later, killing another 299. And in Padang, a second powerful earthquake hit just 12 hours after the first tremors, this time taking down with it the hospitals treating survivors of the first quake. The governments simply have to learn to cope faster and better to preserve life and property.
Surviving is difficult after an event like this if you haven't planned for it.